everybody. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar with Emily Riley of Forrester Research. And my name is Mike Lewis. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Awareness Inc. And it's we're really excited to have Emily on the line today to be talking about something that we got a lot of requests for this topic from the people that have attended some of our last webinars around marketing agencies and social media and what marketers are really expecting from their agencies. So my pleasure to introduce Emily Riley, who's a senior analyst over at Forrester, and she really serves the interactive marketing professionals and specializes in advertiser, consumer, and publisher trends as well as technologies. And that includes everything from social media marketing, online brand and direct response marketing, targeting, measurement, response, really the full gamut of everything. Before she came to Forrester, she worked at Martha Stewart Living Omni Media, where she helped relaunch its website, as an advertising-based content site. Before that, she was at advertising.com as a delivery analyst. It's really my pleasure to have her on the line, and Emily, we really appreciate you taking some time with us today.
Oh, no problem. Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for calling in today. As Mike mentioned, I'm really going to be presenting around how social fits into an agency client strategy and give some great case studies for execution on things like communities and other social elements that have really brought a client's campaign into the next level. So I am attempting to take control here. Okay, there we go. And my presentation will be available, as Mike said, so we're going to follow this up with questions, but you can also get the slides later through the awareness site. So internally, a lot of marketers feel about social media the way this slide looks. They look at it in terms of individual tactics that they read about in trade rags, that they hear about from friends, that their competitors are doing, that their constituency, their customers are using. So today, what's funny, I don't think Twitter is even on the slide right now. Twitter is definitely the one that you hear a lot. Hey, I need Twitter. Community sites, same kind of thing. Does my website need a community site? Well, obviously, it depends, and agencies are really a great facilitator for making sure that the strategy and the understanding of what consumer need is laid out so that this kind of a plan becomes logical. So rather than allowing clients to kind of focus on one tactic, one technology, one hot thing to talk about, what I'm really going to show you here is that it's really complicated, so give your customers a path through the jungle. This is agencies giving clients a path through the jungle, and it's also clients giving their customers a path through the jungle, because everybody is learning social media at the same time. So how do we do this? I'm going to talk about something that we created at Forrester, which is the post strategy to executing social media. It's relevant for agencies and it's relevant for advertisers. I'm also going to outline the 5 objectives, so the O in post, of social marketing, and show you some case studies where this execution really created some fantastic campaigns, and then just a series of short recommendations. So the 4-step approach, you can see that it's P-O-S-T, and those 4 letters can create a lot of different words. So we put it in the order of P-O-S-T on purpose, because it's really the order that you should be executing. Again, both as an agency and as a client. What we mean by people is go figure out what your customers are saying about you, what they're doing on social media, and what they are not getting that you could provide. People can be anything from demographic information, how likely are they to create content online, or how likely are they to sign up for social networking sites, all the way to listening using things like Nielsen Buzz Metrics to understand how favorable are you in the social space? Or, if you start talking, are people even going to listen? Do they care that much about your products to be talking about you? These are the kinds of questions that are important, whether you're trying to create a widget or a community. It just gets you focused on, how likely are they to participate in the way that you want them to participate. Then we're going to talk about objectives. So based around what's possible, what are your people likely to pay attention to and do? What is your objective? What do you really want to get out of this? What does success look like? So we're going to look through 5 different objectives today. And this is a great discussion if you're an agency to lead your client through to get them to kind of stop salivating for Twitter or for a community site and really get some positive, serious objectives around it so that you guys are set up for success. Because the last thing you want to do is spend their money executing on something and then have no ability to prove that it worked. Then we'll talk about the strategy. What needs to be in place, what partnerships need to be aligned, to get from here to there, and how will this affect customer relationships. So in some cases, it's not about a campaign, it's about an ongoing relationship. And so as a partner, a lot of times you're going to need to prepare for follow-up, a type of customer service. Customers will start accepting the fact that, okay, this company's engaged with me, now what? So it's really not just a 2-month execution. In many cases, it needs to be a longer-term discussion. And finally, that will tell you what technologies you need. And in many cases, the technologies will show themselves naturally after you've gone through the P, the O, and the S. And it's a lot easier to talk a client down from being obsessed with one technology if you've kind of allowed them to come to the conclusion themselves that either it's a suite of technologies or maybe something slightly different than they thought they needed. So first, we're going to talk about people. And the real point here is that you want to use all available data sources to understand the social behaviors of you or your client's target audience. So you're providing not only market research like what Forrester provides in his technographics product, but also internal database knowledge that you have that your client can share with you, third-party panel data from a Nielsen or a ComScore, and then again, any social activity behavioral data that you can come to the table with. Today what we're seeing is that there's a big difference in the way people behave in terms of online media use and offline media use. So as an agency, if you're used to planning creative around, a much more spectator-oriented type of media, print or TV, suddenly now you're talking about communication-oriented planning and creative. So what you see here is that half of online users' time is like on email and instant message type communication behaviors, and the other half is on passive website browsing. And that can also equate to things like search and product research. But the two brightly colored triangles at the bottom, this is the emerging stuff. These are the kind of really cool pieces. And social networks in particular, what we're seeing is it's going to go from 6% to 8% to 12%, and it's a combination of the two blue sides, the email and the browsing. You're starting to see a combination of product research, of just having fun playing games, and talking to friends happening all at the same time. And so understanding how your people specifically are going and ramping up in that way will allow you to understand how likely are they to be comfortable posting their own video, uploading content, joining a community site, because each group is different. And so as you can see here, just building the slide out, you have communication on one side, media on the other, and then at the bottom things that are starting to combine the two. So what we've done to categorize people's social behaviors is create a ladder. And at the bottom of the ladder, the least important people to this conversation would be those that are just not in the social space yet. And as you can see, as you go, I guess we just had the inactive there. As you go up the ladder, and I'll fix this before we put it on the site, we build a series of groups, and one of the groups is, which is the next one, is spectators. And it's very important to remember spectators, especially when you're thinking about doing something that makes people create content. I think a lot of us as agencies will focus on the most exciting group of people that are at the top of the ladder, and I'm going to get to them in a minute. The people that are spectators represent, as you can see, almost half of the online community. And when we're creating a community site, a social networking page, they're going to be the ones that read our content, and they're going to ingest that content, and then when they're talking to friends, they're going to talk about it. But so often, we forget about them when we create a strategy for online. We don't provide anything of value for them. A great example would be if you have an upload your own video contest or a community site where you have to be a participant in order to really get anything out of it, you're talking to a very small group of people. If you can repackage that user-generated content, put it up on the front page of the client's homepage, send out an email newsletter with the best topics and a link for them to go read it. This is going to encourage that very large but quiet group to pay attention. Beyond spectators, the 25% group is joiners. Joiners are those that might belong to a social networking site, might be a member of a community, have registered, but they're really not as active posting content. They're much more there to just kind of keep tabs on their friends. And again, they're very valuable. So you're talking about groups that overlap here, so that's why this adds up to more than 100%. You take out the inactives, and the rest of these people all overlap to some extent. And you're talking about a group that is very likely to bump into you as a client creating something on, say, a social networking site, but less likely to maybe friend you or fan you or tweet about you, but still very, very likely to bump into you. The next group up is collectors. I'm going to touch only lightly on collectors. These are really tech-oriented early adopters. They like Delicious and Technorati. They use RSS frequently. They really just like paying attention to new and interesting content that's a little bit more bleeding edge than what the average user likes. And so they like technologies that help them get to that content more quickly. More likely to be important to us is the next group on the ladder. These are critics. Critics are great for bouncing things off of. So they're very likely to answer polls or rate and review products or just simply comment on other people's blogs and community postings. And these are the people that really keep a conversation going. They maintain the value of a site after the very top group, the creators, have started the ball going. The reason the creators are at the top is because that's where we kind of think of the nexus of social media coming together. These people are generating their own content. There is certainly a skew, as you'll see on the next slide, towards younger audiences generating the most content, but that doesn't mean that the creators are only Gen Y. If you even look at baby boomers, a very sizable section of baby boomers is likely to create content when it's relevant for them. And so I encourage you to use data resources available to understand when that is, because it's not always going to work for every single client. There are certain products that people are very passionate about. Harley-Davidson is a great example. You'll find people of all ages be very active on the community site for Harley-Davidson, whereas for a consumer packaged goods company, it might be less likely that somebody who's a baby boomer is going to be talking about those products. At a younger age, somebody like a new mother who's in the Gen Y age could easily be seen online talking about consumer packaged goods products as she decides what's good for her family. So you can see that sometimes it's based around age and sometimes it's not. It's really important, again, to focus on that data that you can collect from all your different resources to see, okay, how many creators do I have? How many critics do I have? What products are they talking about? Is it relevant for my clients or not? So as you can see here, the younger groups are very likely to over-index. But young doesn't mean teen. Young in this case actually means under 35. So the orange line represents the kind of median online behavior, which at this point is in their mid-40s. So as you can see, that median is really related to your age. And the younger you are, generally the more likely you are to participate at every level of the social spectrum. And what that means is if you're working with clients that naturally have a younger audience that they're working with, you kind of have the green light to be much more experimental with your social technologies that you use, but also just you're more capable of getting participation. And so if you really want to lean on those creators and critics to generate a lot of content for you, you're much more likely to be able to do that. If you have a product client that focuses on an older group, say financial services products for retirees, you're going to have to do some digging to understand, are there specific groups, maybe those that are highly affluent and more likely to be comfortable online because they have jobs that allow them to be online all day, and you can create a specific product for those people. But again, knowing the behaviors of your people are really the key to understanding where you get the green light, how much creation, how much user-generated content, and how much reading is really going to happen with each group. So after you really get to know the profile of your client's particular target audience, the next thing to do is select an objective. And this is where the meat of this presentation focuses. There are 5 objectives that we've outlined. And if you're interested, my colleague Josh Burnoff has actually written a book called The Groundswell that gives even more depth into these 5 objectives. The first is listening. And this is a step that I encourage all of your clients to take. And you can certainly help them with that if you're at the agency or vendor partner level, where you're just moving beyond that understanding your people and then understanding what they're already saying. So first, figure out who they are. Next, this listening process is going out there, looking on Twitter, friending people on Facebook, using Google Trends, using even a Delicious, for example, to see what conversations are already taking place. And you can certainly partner with a buzz monitoring service like a Nielsen Buzzmetrics, a Symphony, to figure out even more scientifically what conversations are already occurring. You may find that there's a lot of negative information that's out there. Maybe your role then is to help encourage more positive conversations to show the other side of the argument. Or maybe you need customer service outreach to be the most consistent voice because people are complaining that they're really not getting the help that they need for their product. Or you might have a product that you're representing where there's a ton of passion around it and people just love a platform to sing the praises of that product, maybe learn more about what really goes on behind the scenes. You'll get to understand that very easily if you listen. That's where we encourage everyone to start if they're not there already. Talking is the next one, and talking really is kind of traditional marketing. This is where widgets fit in. This is where engagement advertising fits in, things like viral video, where you're still kind of one-to-many is the mode that you're operating in, but you're allowing consumers to take it and own it, interact with it, move it around to friends. This is really creative online marketing. Then we start getting into the more advanced forms of social marketing that you can provide for your clients. Energizing is where you allow those creators and critics to really let loose. This is where community sites come into really, I think, their best role. This is where social networking sites can have their most active participation. It's where you create features that really encourage that core audience to shine and to participate. The next step supporting is when basically step back and allow them to talk to each other with a lot less involvement from the parent company. And this is something that can work very well if there's a lot of passion or question and answer around a product. How do you use this product? For example, Empowered Moms is a group that I write about quite frequently. They're very interested in sharing knowledge with each other, and in many cases have more knowledge to share, more creative knowledge to share about products than maybe the companies can provide themselves. And so here you step back and you really let the community sites flourish. Embracing is kind of extra credit. This is something that we will read about from particular companies here and there, but it's difficult to embody because, especially as an agency, you need to make sure that your client is set up kind of across silos to pay attention to what's happening in the social space. So you're going beyond just marketing and you're integrating what consumers are saying, what consumers want into, say, product development, into customer service, so that you're really, again, embracing the ideas your customers have and providing them with a better product in a kind of virtuous circle over time. And this is something you can certainly facilitate as an agency, but again, this is extra credit. So let's look at some examples here. Where did my, I guess I'm going to give you examples after I talk about the S and the T. So next is the S. This is the strategy. And what does success look like is really kind of the most important question you're always going to have to ask as an agency or as a vendor. And what that really means internally, if you're a client, is to say, well, okay, what makes me glad that I executed on this? What's going to make me think, yeah, this worked, I'll do it again? And sometimes that means metrics. Sometimes it means you got this many forwards for your viral video. Sometimes it means participants in a community, how many quality conversations are happening. And sometimes it's something a little bit more vague than that, where, for example, you just feel like it improved say you want to move to a younger audience, it improved the feel of your product or your brand to appeal to a younger audience. If it is more vague than that, then the only thing I would say is make sure that it's consistent across a larger swath of marketing and not just a small campaign. So it's going to be a lot harder to continue that momentum if it's just an isolated event. More importantly with strategy, or I guess not more importantly, but more tactically, is, okay, great, so that's what success looks like. What do we actually need to have in place for this to happen? What you need are things like alignment with goals for the people that work in your department that are going to be executing this, very clear contractual agreements with partners to make sure that success is outlined very completely, a dashboard and a setup for analysis so that the metrics in place will actually show you your success, and the resources that you might not have currently that you might need external partnerships for. And then finally, once you have this in place, you're going to understand what technologies are necessary. Do you need to partner with an agency that specializes in widgets? Can you build a community platform and white label it, or are you going to need to have somebody else host it for you and you can outsource it. If you have your strategy in place, that oftentimes will include the budget. So that's going to help you understand technology a lot better too. As an agency, your goal here is to say, let's go through steps 1, 2, and 3. Therefore, by the time you get to 4, you don't look like you're piling on unnecessary technologies. They're going to speak for themselves. They're going to fall naturally into place based around what the people need, what the objectives are, and then how it's going to be executed. So more specifically, this slide is great for a takeaway after the fact, but there are going to be certain tools and tactics that fall into the 5 different objectives. They don't all apply to all of the objectives. So certainly, again, creating a viral video is not necessarily going to help customers support each other when they want to learn more about a product. And so you can imagine that the list on the appropriate social applications can grow. The other thing to think about if you're an agency is the corporate function that aligns with each of these objectives. It may be that you're currently working with the marketing department, but you're going to need to build in relationships with other parts of your client just to make sure that the execution is actually going to work. Because if you're really only working with the marketing department or the brand group in a large company, then what you're going to find is that they say that it's great and then it falls short of actually accomplishing the goal when nobody else within the company is prepared to continue the engagement. So that is something, if you really want to be strategically aligned with your client, remember that it's not just marketing. It can be research, sales, support, and that includes customer service, and development. That can mean product development. So again, figure out the objective and the strategy, and that will help you understand what other groups within my client's company do I really need to make sure I have a handle on. And maybe that's through the marketing department, facilitating some meetings, or maybe it's a broader relationship that borders on consulting. So in summary, I encourage anybody, both at the agency or vendor level and at the direct client level, to go through the POST framework, because it really helps you ground yourself to what are my customers doing today, and what do they need from me? What's my objective? What does success look like? Okay, great. Now that I know those 2 things, what should my strategy be? How am I going to execute on this? What resources do I have? What resources do I need? And then finally, what technologies? So it's not Twitter, it's not Facebook, it's actually a community. It's not a community, it's actually viral video. Rather than allowing that tactic or that tool to dictate your entire execution, which is essentially the backwards way of doing it. Develop your social computing strategy based on objectives. This is really saying, look, tie the O and the S completely together. They should absolutely, hand in glove, make sense. And what I mean by that is, every objective, you should have a way of measuring and executing on that objective in your strategy, word for word. Because if you don't, then you're not going to be able to prove to anybody that you succeeded. And then finally, the power is in the hands of the participants. What this really means is that if you allow your consumers to take over this campaign, they will. If you want to be active in this community, you have to be, because it's not going to happen on its own. You really need to be engaged. You need to be engaged internally, you need to be engaged with the client, and you need to make sure that you understand the engagement that needs to happen for the customers to be motivated on this program. So next, and finally where I thought I was going, is all the case studies. So let's take a look at these and how they align with the different objectives. So listening is really when you've got these 2 people down here and they're talking to each other and you want to kind of understand what they're saying. So in this case, the arrows are going up back to the company because you're basically funneling up information that you're getting from what's out there in the web. And this can happen in a lot of different ways. So one of the examples that we've shown to clients in the past is listening basically on your own site. So asking customers to come to your site and provide you with feedback. And you can be very open about the fact that this is not a community necessarily, but really just a place to talk about what you like and dislike about, your general products, but also maybe the lifestyle around the product. So in this case, it's really a lot more than just the Mattel products. It's really about, hey, we want to know, how does this fit into your life? Is this, a fun thing that you do with your family? Is this something you do on Saturdays? Is this something you do every day? We really want to understand how our products fit into your life. And not only that, but we're going to use this as a platform, not just to get feedback from you, but to provide you with some insight as to what we're doing so that it becomes cyclical. The company that creates this kind of a website is Communispace, and there are others that are in the same group. Passenger.com is another, and they provide technologies that make listening very safe, so that you're not necessarily going out into the ether, but you're really doing a kind of a controlled, almost focus group style version of it. And it can work very well for companies that maybe don't have a ton of conversation happening online about them, or don't trust that that's a great representation of their true target audience, or that they just have very specific questions to ask, and those questions aren't being addressed based on the conversations that are naturally occurring online. This is another example of that with Schwab. In some cases, whatever is happening online, you simply can't get the kind of data you want for legal reasons. So with Schwab, they really have to look at inviting individual clients into a community to ask them pointed questions about finance. This is also the case for things like food and beverage, where there's an age limit to who can join. You want to maybe just make sure that you have a more controlled group of people that you're talking to. So certainly some products you're just naturally going to find more information around them, and others you're going to have to kind of create the conversation yourself. So once you've learned what you need to learn, it's really now time to say, okay, let's execute on a marketing plan. If that's where you are, where you want to rebrand something, you want to launch a product, you want to just get a new audience interested in what you've already been selling, this is where you are today. So this is really the most traditional part of social marketing. This is where you're literally creating something and rolling it out for people to interact with. The thing that's new is that interactivity. How deep can they go while they're engaging with the products? So what we see here is that the more you interact, the longer you can keep it going. That circle of engagement can continue. And that's what some of these case studies show today. So this is Josh Barnoff's favorite thing to do, especially when he's in a room of graying dads and grandfathers, to say something like, let's talk about tampons. And what you can imagine in the room is that there are a lot of groans and odd looks, like, okay, what's he going to do next? Well, what he shows them is this site, beinggirl.com, because if you think that, an adult that's been working in marketing for 20 years doesn't really want to talk about tampons, you can imagine what a 13-year-old girl thinks if somebody like that tried to talk to her about tampons. She would cringe and run away. And that's what P&G has to deal with, is that they're trying to introduce their product to a very shy and very nervous young girl that doesn't really want to talk about it, especially not to a big, scary company. So what they've done to engage at a more realistic and a more comfortable level is to create a website called beinggirl.com, and P&G has several of these. The Pampers one does well in other ways, and I'll talk about that. But they created a ton of content, so it's extremely engaging. It's social because there are things like polls. There are things like question and answer sessions. And the girls get a lot more out of it than just knowledge about the products. As you can see, there's some soft sell in the upper corner. But typically, it's really good content. And this would be something that you could compare to, like a Teen People, something else like that, where there's stars, there's music. It's really not just about the product. They have over 2 million regular visitors to the site, and it obviously rolls over as people go through. So, there are definitely going to be examples like this that you see out there that just don't work as well. And one of the ways that you can make sure that they work is that you're not just looking at the product, but you're looking at a subject that your target audience cares a lot about. So particularly, for example, you work with a company like Awareness to create a community. Just because you have a community doesn't mean someone's going to talk. The issue is, on that community, what are they going to talk about? What do they consider to be really interesting? If it's not the product itself, then let's look at something beyond the scope of the product that is really valuable. And so a great example is Dove. Dove is literally a supermarket soap. But what they did with their campaign for Real Beauty is increase the amount people want to talk about them, because they included conversations about how a woman feels about her body shape and her age, into the conversation, and those are things that women talk about all the time. They made themselves relevant to a larger conversation, and that's where something like a community site or an engagement like you can get on beinggirl.com really starts making a lot of sense. Another one that's very helpful to a lot of people at the talking level is when you're just giving them really useful information at a really easy kind of social, pass-along, viral way. And widgets are great for that. So the Kraft Foods Recipe Finder widget on iGoogle is one example of a bunch of things that they've done here. So they also have an iPhone application that's actually one of the top 10 paid iPhone applications, and it's a what's for dinner. Every day it'll suggest a recipe with an attached menu, and it's great for their target audience. They're not going towards Gen Y. They're going towards that empowered mom, the woman that's on the go, she works and has kids, and, they really understand that audience, and they're giving them something that they want. So, where beinggirl.com is a community where people can spend time and talk, they have the time to do some research, this recipe finder is almost the exact opposite. It makes their lives more efficient, and it makes them have to spend less time on something that they need to do every day. So certainly what we see a lot of times is that an agency or a client will fixate on an activity that might be very time-consuming, but there are certainly other ones that are great examples of time saving. So again, with awareness hosting this, they obviously create community sites, and those community sites can have people that engage for very long periods of time as they're kind of talking to each other, getting to know each other. But it's also a great way to do things like more efficient customer service. Can I get an answer from somebody more quickly here than anywhere else? And so you can see that it can really work both ways. It can work as a way of building brand equity, building an affiliation to other customers, or as a way of simply making somebody's life easier. The next step is energizing your best consumers. So sometimes these are the influential people, sometimes these are the heavy buyers of a product, and sometimes they just fall in the sweet spot of that broader topic that you might attach a brand or product to. And this is where you go find this person that's a little bit more into your conversation that you're creating or a little bit more into your product, and you empower them in some way to forward your information along and get other people excited about what you're doing. So this is that idea, that viral kind of pass along. That's how it started on YouTube. But you can move this beyond that. You can get it to be where, this is how you grow the number of people on your social networking page. This is how you grow the number of fans you have, the number of people talking on your community, the number of people blogging about you. That's where energizing really comes in. It's how do we excite them to talk about this more? So here we see just by being different, Skittles is getting people to talk about them. But not only that, Skittles is making sure that my colleague Jeremiah Aoyang, who blogs frequently about social marketing, talks about fishing where the fish are. If you want to energize people, go to where they're already active. And Facebook is certainly a place like that. And this is very experimental. So unfortunately, I can't tell you that this was definitely a success. But what really makes me interested in something like this is that Skittles was willing to just say, let's throw our homepage out there to the masses. So if you type in Skittles.com, this is where you're going to go. And they rotate it. They rotate it between Facebook, I think it's Delicious, and Twitter. And what they're trying to figure out is, all right, if we just give up on the idea of a big corporate homepage, we put it up in the corner, and instead we allow people's opinions of us and their creativity to shine, are we going to really amp up the amount of energy we get from the people that really like our brand? And what they found is there's definitely a subset of people out there that want to interact. They want to talk about their favorite color Skittle or talk about, where they were when they first tried them, and this is a subset of your audience. But the spectators, again, that very large, quieter group, are reading this and they're soaking up that enthusiasm. They're getting energized by the people that really care the most about the product. And so Skittles, by doing this, is creating kind of a platform or showcase to show off their energized customers to the rest of the people out there, the curious, quiet group. And it's a great way, again, of kind of allowing word of mouth to happen somewhat naturally, comparatively speaking. You don't have to be this experimental. In other ways, you can do an energizing type campaign in a way that really helps somebody do something they were already going to do anyway. And again, that's where it doesn't just have to be about deep engagement or really creative engagement. Sometimes it's just about making our lives easier. And this is a great example. So Toyota decided for fantasy sports to be a sponsor of a whole bunch of widgets for fantasy sports members to manage and interact with each other during the season. And so you can trade players, you can see how you're doing compared to your friends, you can create a network. Another thing that you can do with this kind of a widget is use Facebook Connect, and you can actually take a social graph and float it above Facebook so that, say, everybody's in the same fantasy club together, they don't have to sign up to talk to each other in multiple places. They can always be connected either on their widgets or their iPhones or on Facebook or on a community site. And all of those things really work well together when the sponsor, again, is facilitating something, making it easier for these guys to talk to each other. And, you know, if you see that it's the Toyota version of this that's working better than any other and your friend is really influential over you, they're going to jump over and do the same thing. And in this case, it's sponsored, but in other cases, for example, with the Craft widget, you could imagine that Craft is going to get a lot of direct new customers as a result of, you know, giving energized friends of friends an insight into, hey, this is the shopping list you need, and oh yeah, it includes some of the Craft products. So you can not only build interest, but also build new customers pretty directly by just facilitating people's lives. And then again, we sometimes forget about mobile when we're talking about social marketing, but really the two are hand in hand, particularly for younger audiences. So this is a case where Virgin Mobile facilitated on Facebook a mobile program. And so what they wanted is for teens to get the word out about certain Virgin Mobile programs by essentially, it's calling, you know, Friend My Phone. And so you can basically become friends and spread the word, and it almost becomes like a pyramid scheme where the more friends you sign up, the more minutes you get. And you can do the same thing and recruit friends, and friends can recruit their friends, and before you know it, everybody's getting free minutes, and a lot more people get to know the Virgin Mobile brand. And so this is a great way that they would roll out products, is they would say, you know, if you get one friend to sign up for this, you get this many minutes, and that friend would do the same thing. So it kind of connects mobile to social networking sites. And younger generations, they have apps on their phones already to do a lot of stuff with social networking sites, so it's very easy for them to do that. So again, feel free to incorporate mobile, particularly for very young audiences. The next one that we're going to look at here is supporting, and this is really where community sites such as Awareness come into play. You're talking about creating a conversation and allowing that conversation to grow and to bloom. And what you really want to do as a marketer is just make sure that you step back and allow somebody's real voice to be showcased. So in addition to community sites, what we see here, kind of the 101 of this supporting objective are ratings and reviews. Ratings and reviews have taken off. They've become standard for a lot of retail sites, and it's really the place, say, even in your listening part of your objectives, it's a great way to understand who's out there and what do they think. If people are willing to rate and review, and I think here you see there's 32 reviews of a standard case of 8.5 by 11 computer paper or copier paper on Staples. I mean, that's completely ridiculous, but it just shows how much people like to rate and review. So if you are considering to create a community, for example, one way to start is, if it's a retail product, is to look at, if you already have ratings and reviews, what are people talking about mostly? Because those are the types of conversations that they're going to want to maybe talk about more on a community. If there's always one feature they go back to on all the bags that your customer is selling, well, maybe a conversation about, well, how do we make it better, or why is it so important to you, is a great way to start. So it's great for learning, not just as a feature for the retail site. But talking about communities, there are communities that you can create on your customer's own site, but then there are also off-site communities that you can use or facilitate, and you can connect the two. So here's a great example of an off-site community that has a lot of value. Smart Car is kind of a cult favorite of a lot of drivers. It's obviously environmentally friendly. It's very popular in Europe. So it's a kind of unique set of drivers that really wants to talk about this car. And so, as you can imagine, community site has naturally already been built just by a fan. And one of the things you want to do if you're going to want to create conversations for your client is to understand what community sites are already out there, what conversations are already taking place, because you don't necessarily want to double your efforts and divide the audience. You want to instead encourage the audience where they are and augment that, if you do create a community site of your own, with something that's different or complementary to the community that's already happening. So this one really is more around just being a fan. Are there events where we can go to talk more? Or, is there a rally day? It's really the kinds of things that fans want to talk about, just enthusiast information in general. Now, you can imagine that Smart Car in particular has conversations that they would be able to foster a lot more expertly. For example, how do I get higher up on the list for a hot color? When will I know, when my car's coming? Where is a good place to, refuel and park for a teeny car? What's the safety, should I be worried about highway safety? Questions like that, Smart Car is much better at facilitating and could do on their own community site, and then they don't necessarily have to double down on these more fan-oriented conversations, but they can certainly direct traffic here. And the more they direct traffic, to be honest, the more natural synergy and interaction they're going to have with their own community. So you can certainly build off communities that already exist in a way that actually grows your own community. You don't need to compete with communities. But you can also, I said I'd talk about campers a little bit later, and here we are. You can build communities where necessary. Nobody's going to build a Pampers community, but certainly there are a lot of communities out there for moms. And so what Pampers decided to do was to have a very specific on-site community just for moms talking about their kids and talking about potty training and things that are very specific that may or may not get enough play in a more general mom's site. For example, a mom blog with comments. You're not necessarily going to get to those more specific questions. And what they do is they have experts that answer questions and just kind of help conversations along when necessary, because in a lot of cases, moms not only need information from each other, but they are looking for expert feedback. And so that is something else to keep in mind with your communities. Are you going to want to have, just your own feedback, or are you going to want to have experts come in, maybe from outside, that really get everybody excited and talking? The next one is embracing. And embracing is where, it's kind of, again, this virtuous cycle where everybody gets a chance to improve the product. And it's kind of a synergy. We're all talking together and working well together. And again, this is kind of that extra credit. Starbucks has reacted very well to some very negative commentary online by basically saying, okay, let's do a virtual community where you guys can submit comments to us, things that suggestion box, if you will, where we'll take a look, and if it's feasible, we can make it happen, then we will. So free Wi-Fi, again, everybody wanted free Wi-Fi in the stores. They're working on it, and they got this feedback from consumers. A lot of this is also around, we want more free trade coffee. It can kind of run the gamut. And basically just by saying that they're listening, and it's not just the marketing department, it goes all the way through, just the presence of a page like this. So if you have a client that's nervous about customer service, nervous about, maybe I can't join the whole conversation, I just want to get people's feedback, and then I'll just respond to the best ideas, then this is a good example of how to do that. Another example here is just with how you execute on your more standard marketing or site design. In this case, Piper Lime got a lot of feedback that they really needed to include customer ratings and reviews the way their biggest rival Zappos does. And they listened to customers and they delivered. And by saying that they delivered because customers wanted them to do this, they really get extra credit because it looks like what they're doing is directly related to what the customers want. So finally, I'm just going to give you a couple of recommendations around what we looked at today, and these are relatively broad. But again, I think the truth lies in the case studies here. Embrace the fact that consumers communicate with each other about you. This is that people listening. Start with what's already happening. Start with what consumers are already doing. Learn as much as you can about the target audience. Learn as much as you can about what the target audience does on social networking sites, on community sites. Do they use widgets? And then finally, learn what they're already saying about the client and the products. What do they care about that might go a little bit beyond that that's more interesting? So, example, with Dove, they might not talk about supermarket soap, but they certainly are going to talk about, well, I want to be clean and fresh and feel good about myself. So you can understand that there are conversations happening that are related to products, maybe not directly. Use the post methodology. This way, you're not going to just be obsessed with tools and tactics. I need to be on Twitter. I need to have a community site. You're going to execute in a way that makes it successful. You're going to execute in a way that makes sense. And so the client's going to be a lot happier. And, of course, you want to make sure with posts that you include metrics, that you're making sure that you can prove success at the end. And if it's ongoing, that you're ready to encourage interaction over a long period of time. Select one objective per initiative to have the most impact. I do think that if you're only at the listening stage with a client, that's okay. Sit there until you feel ready to go to the next objective because you need to be prepared. A lot of times you're going to be at, say, talking for quite a while if you're only going to be able to work with the media buying team or the marketing team. Once you start getting into those next stages where things like community sites can happen, Facebook pages can happen, that's really where the fun begins. And those objectives are slightly more advanced, but certainly going to create a lot more engagement with consumers. But you have to make sure that you're ready for that before you get there. You have to do the listening, and you have to do some talking to understand what kind of engagement you can expect. So I want to say thank you very much. I know we have time for some questions, and there are some you can certainly write them on the side. I don't know if on WebEx you see you can just write them in a little box, or we can facilitate it through the phone. So it's really up to you guys.
Cool. Well, thanks very much, Emily. I really appreciate you taking some time. We do have a ton of questions that have come in. So well, before I get to them, I just wanted to announce one thing real quickly while I have everybody's attention. Our next webinar is coming up May 13th at 2 p.m. It's David Meerman Scott, Creating a Worldwide Rave Through Communities. You can register at awarenessnetworks.com, just re-registered for the last one. So hope you can make it to that one as well. So quick plug before we get to the Q&A. So Emily, one of the big questions that people came up with, and it actually came up multiple times, was really around the agency side of everything. And what should brands, first of all, look for when they're targeting agencies in regards to social media, but also what questions should they be asking of the agencies that they're looking at?
So the agencies need to be able to bring something to the table for all four elements of post. They need insight into your customer behavior. Do they have third-party data insights that you don't have? Do they have panel data? Do they have things like Forrester technographics data, just insight into very specific user segments? Do they have the ability to really provide you with some listening? Are they able to tap into conversations that are happening across other communities out there, blogs, et cetera, so that you're getting insight right at the beginning? Because if they don't know about your customers and you're doing all that educating, that's no good. Next was objectives. If they're trying to push expensive things on you without understanding what success looks like, then you're going towards somebody that's not going to use your best interest when they're executing. You want to make sure that the agency is calm and attentive and listening to you when you start, and that they come to you in a consultative stance where they're saying, okay, how are we going to measure this? What do you want to get out of this? Who's going to be aligned within your company? If they're not asking these questions, it's not the right partner for something that's so engaging as a social strategy. The last thing you want is to create a community where the agency is completely uninvolved. You really need to make sure that they have your best interest in mind. The next thing you want to understand is, who else have you done this for, and give me some case studies. So I easily showed you a whole slew of case studies here today. If you go through the P and the O, and they can't show you that they've successfully gone through the strategy and execution of something like this, then they might not have the expertise that you need. So you want to definitely look for, I need something very similar to what we were talking about here, and I want to see how you executed. I want to see how many people were involved. And, what did it look like? Did it happen in 2 weeks? Did it happen in 6 months? And what was the consumer behavior? Did you actually get the kind of interaction that you wanted? And you need to ask those hard, specific questions. And in many cases, the agencies, if they have executed, will be able to give you the phone number of some of their clients so that you can just talk and ask and see, how did it go? What did you learn so that I can make sure that I don't make those same mistakes? That's definitely something you need. A lot of times I get the question, well, okay, it's a small creative agency, but they don't have the ability to execute, so it's a lot of partnerships that I need to deal with it. How do I deal with that? If you have a creative agency that's just got the ability to create something cool, and then you need to have other partners. So, for example, rather than go through the agency to get to a company like Awareness, you would need to partner yourself directly. Make sure that you have the team in place internally to really full-time manage that process, because suddenly that strategy and execution is on you, and you want to make sure that you can really perform, because the individual groups are going to have a lot harder time executing successfully if you don't have someone as a point person internally that can communicate back and forth.
So one of the questions that keeps coming up too, and actually came up a couple times just as you were speaking, was around, and I don't want to get into specific examples of it because some people actually mention specific examples, but around how agencies have kind of stumbled in the past. And you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I was wondering, based on your experience, where have you seen agencies kind of stumble in implementing a social media strategy?
The number one thing that I find is that they focus on the creators and they don't give anything to that silent majority, the joiners and the spectators. They do the video upload, they do the community site that's totally locked behind a registration, and they don't serve up any of that content for people that just want to read it. You really need to make sure, particularly in those high-touch executions like a community site, like a Facebook page, that there's something for that quiet group that just wants the content. They don't necessarily want to write anything or create their own Doritos video. They're going to get something just from being there. And that, again, is the silent majority. They're the ones buying the products every single day. There's a giant group, and that's who you used to market to on TV and print. Just because social media includes user-generated content doesn't mean that it can't include that silent group. So that's the first. And the second is definitely that a lot of agencies are interested in younging down a target audience in order to squeeze it into social media. So you can imagine that a financial services company doesn't want to suddenly look hip on Facebook simply because the agency thinks that everything social needs to look young. And that's where, again, it really makes sense to look at your people and your objectives before you execute, because it might be that it's very social. A community is a very social execution, but it doesn't necessarily have to be flashy and young. It can be very useful and fit very well with, a more solid blue chip look to a website, but you need to just make sure you're on the same page there.
Mm-hmm. So how do you, one of the questions actually coming from an agency is that they're constantly getting the quote-unquote ROI question from their clients. And most want to do something in the social space, but they're having trouble trying to figure out how to justify an investment based on the potential return. And I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Absolutely. So there's a methodology that I write about, and I also actually present a workshop on this. So if you're interested in contacting me directly, that's great. But it's really a framework you need to put in place that's an attribution model. And what attribution does is it connects the dots from early funnel behavior like brand awareness down to the very end, which is the purchase. And if you have other brand campaigns that you're executing on, like a display banner, that is actually more similar to what you're looking at, like say on a widget or a Facebook page, than anything else you're doing. So it's okay to compare across execution to things like display or, say, unbranded search terms in order to get a better handle on what ROI looks like. Because it's possible you've already benchmarked some ROI from other brand executions. Do you have surveys that you're using, for example? Can you use changes on website behavior? Have you cookied people and followed them to the site and benchmarked different site behaviors and what that equates to at an ROI level? It's a very detailed discussion. There are a lot of different methodologies. One is switching from the last click to where's the first click, because the first click could be a YouTube video, the first thing that person saw. And if you're dropping cookies on everything they do, you can look at that kind of a methodology as being a way to justify the value of early funnel execution. So I could go on and on, but it's certainly a matter of saying, okay, this is an early funnel thing that I'm doing. I need to cookie these people, and I need to treat it the way I treat my other brand executions.
Right. And do you see companies starting to develop their own capabilities that might compete with agencies? Are you seeing that more and more? Or
I do to a degree. I think that certainly like a company like yours is a great partner. You provide the technology and the service for one specific piece. But then there are other companies, for example, a social networking site itself that will have creative services in-house that will offer to do a lot of the execution themselves at a cost savings. And so you can see that there might be some overlap there with an agency. And then there are other cases, Buddy Media and Virtue, for example, are partners with Facebook, and they create widgets, but a full-service agency could also be the one to create a widget. So which one do you go with? And that's a decision that the client really needs to make based on, how much they need around that one execution.
Could you talk a little bit about one of the other questions that we got, and there's kind of a mix of B2B and kind of B2C focused companies on the line.
Mm-hmm.
But one interesting question that we got is, do you know of any case studies that talk about people who manufacture kind of one-time purchase, products like HVAC systems or water heaters or garage door openers or that kind of stuff?
Yep.
Do you know of any case studies around, situations like that where people have started communities or started, social networking to get the word out?
Well, I think that what you find a lot of times is for a product like that, it's not the product itself that's going to catalyze a community, it's what's around it. So is it making sure that your house is safe? As the climate changes, what do you need to know to prepare yourself and your family? Insurance companies are very interested in conversations like this because, you purchase an insurance policy once and then you just kind of pay for it over time. It's kind of like purchasing a big ticket item and then just paying for maintenance over time. Cars, it's the same kind of thing. Where, once you're done buying the car, it's really around the lifestyle. What do I need to do? And that's where listening comes in. What are those satellite conversations that are happening that are relevant to your product? Because if your product is not so sexy, then it's really not going to be around the love of that product, but more around either practical or personal conversations that are satellite conversations for that product.
Absolutely. And just getting back to developing brand's voice. One of the questions that came in was how do you actually start and go about developing a brand's voice? And do you have any strategies or tips for people who are just getting started and starting to launch stuff? And this actually applies to the agency side as well, because I'm sure they're working with a lot of customers who are just starting to get into social media. But how does a brand start really developing their voice?
So I think there are two things to start with. The first is, who is your general audience? Because if your general audience is conservative 55-year-olds in the Midwest, then adopting, an urban, younger voice is obviously not a good idea just because you're using social. So I know it sounds very simple, but it's absolutely true. Just remember who your target audience is and keep that in mind throughout. That's one. Two is, with listening, you're going to understand how these people are talking to each other online by using a platform like a Nielsen BuzzMetrics. You can take snippets of conversations and look at what kind of grammar comes up over and over again. What are the conversations that are happening? What are the themes? And then you'll figure out where the holes are where your brand can fit in. If your brand is known as, again, a conservative, old school kind of brand offline, there's no reason that you necessarily have to completely change that, but you have to make it relevant for your target audience. So again, it's that idea of saying, I'm not going to change too much. I want to know what people are already talking like so that I feel natural when I go into this. And then finally, it makes a lot of sense to have a few consistent internal people assigned to managing that, because the longer they do it, the more insight they're going to have into what the community wants and how they talk. The best thing to do when doing this is to involve customer service, because customer service is the group that is always on the phone with the customer. So they know what they talk like, they know what they're saying, and they know how they react to the brand.
Absolutely. That's a great recommendation. We actually tell a lot of our customers that's a great way to get a feel for what's going on, within the company, what's happening within the customer base, customer service. Before I ask the next question, I just want to let everybody know, because we're getting a couple of questions for it. We are going to send out the presentation this afternoon, so you guys will have a copy of everything we're talking about, and a recording of everything will be available before the end of the week. So just to make sure everybody knows that, we're going to have everything available. One question that came in a couple times is, how do you deal with customers who have legal issues? So specifically, around engaging customers like the pharmaceutical industry. How do you deal with situations like that?
Absolutely. So there are a couple of different ways that I've seen, and the first thing to do is absolutely involve your lawyers up front in the listening stage, because a lot of these conversations are already happening. So just get them comfortable with understanding what is already being said. Because in some cases, the best argument is that, look, I don't want to be, say, for pharma, recommending a prescription medication to people. That's not what this is for. What this is for is answering questions where I'm helpful as an entity outside of my individual drug or my individual financial product. It's really a matter of general customer service, directing the customer to interesting or relevant or pertinent information. So that would literally be a matter of reaching out to customers where they already are asking questions. And the legal team is going to be, I think, 100 times more likely to say yes to something like that. The other thing that you definitely need to do is look at what the regulations allow for. If, say, for example, you have agents that can talk but you cannot, then maybe involve the agents in the conversation. If it needs to be that it's invite only, hospitals deal with this on a pretty regular basis. You might find that you have some very motivated customer bases where it's, by limiting the conversation, it actually makes the conversation more valuable. So you might have to go through doctors, for example, where the doctors will, on a patient-by-patient basis, invite them and provide them with a pamphlet with a URL. That is not a bad thing. In some cases, it's actually better. They become more loyal. So you do obviously have to work within the legal confines that, we've all been kind of strapped with in this industry, depending on how strict they are, is part of it. But it's also, how do you lay it out to your legal team? Are you laying it out that, you want to recommend all these things you're not allowed to recommend, and that there's free-for-all of the conversation, you're not going to get anywhere. But if it's really, look what's already taking place out there, look what the questions are that people have, we want to make sure they're not doing anything dangerous, that they're getting the information they need. And to do that, we really need to be active in this environment.
All right, so last question. I can see we're starting to cut into people's lunchtime, so I want to make sure we're still getting questions. But what we'll do is take them offline, and if we can get back to you, we'll just respond directly to any of the questions that you've asked, make sure we try to cover our bases with everybody. And we really appreciate all the questions coming in. But last question, the one that did come up a lot during the conversation, as you and I were talking at the end too, is what's the one thing that either agencies or brands should avoid as they start to go out and start to implement a social media strategy?
The one thing that you should avoid is being irrelevant or redundant. You really need to spend time understanding what's already happening out there with your people, what they're saying, where they're going, so that you become a natural extension of what they're doing. You serve a need, you encourage something that they want, you make life easier for them, more exciting. You're not making their life more annoying, more complicated, or taking them away from an activity that they enjoy doing.
That is great advice. I just want to say thanks again, Emily. We really appreciate your time this afternoon, and it sounds like people got a lot out of it, and really excited to have you on, and hope we can have you back again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike.
And thanks, everyone, for joining us. Like I said, our next session will be May 13th with David Merriman Scott, and hope you can sign up. But thanks again for everybody for joining, and look forward to talking with you soon.
Great.